This is a 1970 Cadillac Eldorado right-hand fender extension. This is for Robert McClanahan in Pensacola, Florida. This includes a beautiful rubber filler, the retainer for the rubber filler, which has been cleaned and surface treated with a climatized surface treatment, the correct screws, the 5 screws that go into the base of the fender extension, and the 5 screws that screw into the quarter panel. 5 core screws with a point for the quarter panel and 5 machine thread screws for the bottom of the V. And the V retainer that corresponds to the top of the convoluted trajectory of the filler that mounts inside and fixably retains to the inside bottom of the fender extension. The fender extension is comprised of this outer shell that has 4 individual trim pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4 trim pieces are basically 2 fluted members. These are polished stainless steel, left and right as defined by the curvature, and with a long edge and a shorter edge, whereby the shorter edge is on the outside and the longer edge is on the inside. They don't come out this easy. This is because I've already taken them out and just basically placed them on the top. But this is the fluted side member. You can see that there's a short side and a much wider side. The wider side goes on the inside. The shorter edge goes on the outside. The units align and press down and snap in place. But you don't want to do that until you have the other 2 members of the trim. As I said, there's 4 pieces of trim. There's the lower trim, and this is a chrome plated plastic part. Very, very delicate. This is the lower, mounts here, and the upper. So the people from Mako, they're going to be receiving the outside fender extension as such. They'll sand it down, prime it, and paint it, and do their thing. And then they'll be ready to go ahead and reassemble the jewelry. The lower plastic chrome-plated original 1970 lower escutcheon bezel is mounted here. It is held in place with a snap-in retainer clip. This is the retainer clip. Almost impossible to remove without breaking this plastic part. Very, very carefully you have to mount it in place. And from the inside, take the retainer clip, and I'm going to do it from the top just so you can see, but it's better to do it from the inside, and push the retainer clip in place. So this retainer clip, this black plastic retainer clip, catches this outside depressed area of the chrome bezel and the inside wall of this little shelf. Very, very carefully. You snap it in like that, and that's what retains the bottom. Now we'll do the top. In a similar fashion, this is the top chrome bezel. Also plastic, chrome plated plastic. Very easy to break. Requires an awful lot of care. This mounts as so. And is held in place in the same fashion with the retainer clip. Use 2 fingers wedged in between like this. Are you zooming in and seeing that? And push in place as so. And that's how you mount the top bezel. So once you have the top chrome escutcheon bezel and the lower chrome escutcheon bezel, you then take your fluted members, the right one for the right side, with the short edge on the outside. Zoom in right here, please. Line it right up to the edge there and push down, and it snaps in place as so. And that's how the outer fluted member attaches to the once fully painted and completed extension assembly. So we'll go on from there to one that's already has the 4 pieces attached. And the outer shell with its chrome, once it's painted, with its chrome and fluted polished stainless steel trim attached to it, will then be ready to pass over the electrical bucket with the lens mounted to it. So this is the electrical bucket. The electrical bucket has 2 holes in the back and 3 mounting screws. The mounting screws will of course not have the nuts on them when it's passed into the quarter panel, and then from the inside of the trunk you'll attach the mounting screws, and that will fixably retain the entire assembly. So in this instance we'll be removing the screws and attaching the red lens. So the red lens that Robert's going to get is going to be much nicer than this, but this is for the purposes of demonstration. So this is the outer gasket. The gasket is attached to the lens first. Do not put the lens here and then try to squeeze in the lens. We're dealing with 50-year-old plastic that's very, very brittle, regardless of how good the condition is. So we have to have extreme care. So the gasket is placed on the lens. The lens is then mounted onto the bucket. You have two raised retainer lips, part of the formation of the electrical bucket. You have to push in with your thumb, and I like to push in on either side to get the lens to go in gently. No force whatsoever. Okay, 50-year-old plastic does not require or does not stand for any force. So once we're in place, we can see that we have maybe an 1/8 of an inch gap here for the screw to bring it down its final distance. Same on both sides. So we're now ready to go ahead and put the mounting screws. So there's 2 screws, multi-step screws. They're basically shoulder screws with a 1/4 inch length of thread at the very bottom. And I'm just going to snug it up. I'm not going to tighten it, just going to snug it up a little bit on the one side, and then go to the back side and snug up the other side. Lining that up. And you can see how there's a gap and this thing has raised. So again, we got to be very, very careful and not over tightening these screws, pushing down on both sides equally, and never use the jacking of the screws or the tightening of the screws to bring the lens down. You're only snugging up, fingertips tight, I should say, and pushing down on the lens, as so. Pushing down and tightening up. Pushing down, not too hard now, because we're dealing with 50-year-old brittle plastic on these red lenses. Irreplaceable. And now we're good and we're ready to go. We've got a good connection. So we've got the electrical bucket with the lens. The wiring harness has 2 light bulbs. Each of the light bulb has a spring clip butterfly-like attachment on the end kind of like a flower, really. I don't know why I called it a butterfly. It's more like a spring-loaded flower, like a tulip. And that spring-loaded tulip that is the receptacle for the light bulb will go in here and snap in place. 1, 2. So we've got the electrical bucket with our 3 retaining members with the lens mounted and the gasket fixably constrained with the 2 screws. This will now slide inside the fender extension assembly. Before I do that, I'll show that there's 3 mounting screws, 1, 2, 3, that go into these 3 holes. This one up here is very difficult to get to. These 2 are easily accessible on the bottom. So with one hand we hold this, the other hand we bring down the assembly, lay it on the table, and allow it to fall in place. So now what we have is the right hand passenger side tail light extension assembly ready to go, and we only need to screw in the electrical bucket into the outside housing. So the outside housing has 3 screws, 1 on top and 2 down here. These are Phillips button head screws, 2, 1, 2. Tighten these up. And now we're ready for the top screw. And there it is, deep down in there. And what I've done for this is I've taken another screwdriver with my screw and I put a little bit of yellow tape holding the screw so that I can get down in there, as so. Let me repoint the light. Get a little bit better light there. And you can see the screw down in there in place. So now I'll just tighten all 3 of them up. Never lay the light like this and tighten the screws down, because the red lens cannot support the weight and it'll crack. So I like to have it down on its side when I'm tightening up these screws. Okay, so there we have it. Perfect. Okay, so there's our extension assembly, and now we're ready to mount it on the back of the Eldorado and attach it with the 3 nuts. So we'll walk over to the Eldorado and we'll make a new video there.